Okay, I see we have a quorum, so I'll call the meeting to order. President Peterson just returned from a trip, so I'll be facilitating the meeting today. Welcome back, President Peterson. I will now ask our clerk, Connor Ayers, to please call roll for attendance.
Thank you. Counselor Simpson.
President, good morning.
Good morning. Counselor Nolan.
Hello, I'm here.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Good morning.
Morning. President Peters or Counselor Rosenthal.
Good morning.
Counselor Lewis.
Present.
Counselor Wong.
Present.
And President Peterson.
Here, and thank you for allowing me to be virtual, everybody. I've got a European cold that I didn't want to spread to anybody else. No.
All right, well, before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
Apologies for the technical difficulty. Well, I can just say the words, I think, since I think we're having a little trouble with this video. So the nearest defibrillator is on the steps leading down to Grand Avenue. And in the event of emergency, please call 911 and alert the folks at the front desk. In the event of emergency, we will also head down the stairs and exit through Grand Avenue. Thank you.
Okay, counselors, welcome back to our budget season. Today we'll hear 3 presentations on department budgets. First of these proposed budgets is from our DEI department. And from that team, we have Sabrina Owens-Wilson, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Cassie Salinas, the Deputy Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusions.
Good morning. Thank you, Deputy Council President, Metro Councilors. I'm Sabrina Owens-Wilson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Department. And I'm honored, proud, humbled to be joined by my partner in this work, Cassie Salinas, our Deputy Director. We will start with, next slide, please. We will start with a snapshot of where the department is. Then we'll dive into the budget presentation with an update on this fiscal year's modifications, our budget performance measures and equity metrics, investments in target areas, and our proposed budget and modifications for next fiscal year. Next slide, please. The Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Department leads Metro's work to achieve racial equity outcomes within the agency and across the region. With a focus on shifting culture and systems, DEI works in partnership with agency leadership, department and venue staff, and community partners to develop, implement, and evaluate strategies to advance racial equity and inclusion. DEI manages Metro Council's Council-adopted strategic plan to advance racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, which guides the racial equity strategies across the agency. To support effective implementation of the strategic plan, the department leads agency-wide initiatives and programmatic work focused on systems change and provides technical support to departments and venues in this work. The department is an amazing group of leaders, many of whom are here today. Thank you. That are really committed to this work. We do this work in partnership with leadership, with you all as counselors, and in partnership with a growing list of dedicated equity and culture leaders embedded in various departments across Metro and in the venues. Next slide, please.
Good morning. My name is Cassie Salinas. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Deputy Director for the Diversity and Inclusion Department. DEI's agency-wide initiatives focus on equipping the staff and leadership with the tools to effectively embed racial equity in Metro's priorities. Each of our positions in the DEI department carry a body of programmatic work that focus on shifting systems and institutional structures in order to achieve racial equity outcomes in the region and within Metro. Our staff also serve as strategic advisors on the topics that correspond with the programs they lead, some that you see here reflected on the PowerPoint today. The department's regional programs focus on workforce development, building pathways for BIPOC communities to inform decision-making that impacts the lives, and providing analytical and strategic expertise needed to ensure Metro's policies and analysis in our programs and investments and our strategies advance racial equity. And additionally, our DEI team is charged with advancing culture and systems change to ensure Metro is an inclusive, equitable, welcoming, and accessible place by centering diverse and marginalized employees. We help foster a deeper sense of belonging in the workplace by increasing Metro's capacity to produce and measure equitable outcomes. DEI is also leading the agency's work to ensure staff have the tools to serve the needs of people with disabilities. This is a newer and growing portfolio of work with the leadership of Heather Busick and Sabine Rear. They will help ensure Metro not only meets accessibility standards, but will help develop strategies to increase the capacity of staff to better engage communities with intersecting and overlapping social identities such as race and disability. And this year in particular has been about building a strong foundation for our newly formed department, which included focusing on culture and people and the development aspects, ensuring we're setting aside time and resources to make space to focus on building the team, developing our core values, and supporting the growth of everyone within the department, and also building the essential elements of what makes a department function and operate. Thanks to our admin, Melissa Pallavicino, and the support of Robin Briggs and FRS, we've been able to build a program-based budgeting so program leads can plan and spend allocated resources more effectively in the coming year. Now I'm going to hand it over to Sabrina.
Next slide, please. So for our update for our FY 23-24 budget, our modifications, we had 3 modifications this year. Our first was extending the civic engagement capacity building grant manager position so we could complete the pilot grant cycle, which we did, and we'll talk more about in the proposed budget modifications for this coming year. Our second modification was resources to support the strategic plan to advance racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think both accounting for our leadership transition and the need to really ensure that we're building a strong foundation for the update, we've utilized these funds to complete a look back at what we have accomplished for the 2016 plan and really understand the foundation that we're building from. We've also invested in training, certification, and learning opportunities to ensure our staff are equipped with the tools that they were going to need for the update. We are going to be working with the COO's office to build a plan for the update, including timelines, resource needs, structure, and most importantly, or also important, the plan for engaging with you all as counselors. And then the last funding we requested last year was to provide support, one-time funding to support capacity for DEI initiatives, including the exploration of a green job strategy. Some of these funds were utilized to really do some of the work that Cassie talked about building the foundation for the department. We did pause the work on the exploration of the green job strategy as I settled into my role and to account for some of the staff transitions that were central to this work. But we look forward to re-engaging in this work as because it was always running parallel and as a part of the climate task force as that work continues in the coming months. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about our budget performance measures and equity metrics. First, I want to acknowledge and thank our staff who have helped each department ensure that they had an equity metric identified for this year. A huge thanks to Sabrina Catalina for their support and all of the finance managers across the agency that really supported the departments in this work. This is a great step in helping us better measure our impact. As we further develop our capacity to identify equity metrics and report out, We are continuing to learn from an evolving field and the best practices to push toward metrics that speak to the true impact of our racial equity strategies. In this coming year, we're looking forward to pushing toward outcome-based metrics. There are many parts and converging roads in this journey, including the reporting of year-over-year data, which we are reporting today. For the DEI department, there's a through line between our equity metrics and how our work supports the strategic targets and the performance measures that we can use to understand our impact. As a central service, our equity metrics focus on the role DEI plays in supporting the agency as an employer and a deliverer of services in the region, in achieving equity outcomes in the form of programs, frameworks, and tools, technical assistance, and more. Our first equity metric focuses on construction careers pathways, a program that ensures capital projects delivered by Metro and our regional partners create shared economic opportunity and prosperity in the form of career pathways for BIPOC and women workers. Our second focuses on supporting the agency in recruiting, retaining, and promoting a diverse workforce by focusing on the role managers play and creating a welcoming workplace where employees have the tools and support they need to advance racial equity. For this year, we're reporting on the regional project of construction career pathways, while our colleagues in capital assets management will be reporting on the performance of Metro-specific projects. As this work continues to develop, so does our ability to talk about the impact of the work across the region. Last year, we reported on the dollar amount of capital projects covered by the Regional Workforce Equity Agreement, which is our most comprehensive approach that's being executed in partnership with our union trades partners. The Regional Workforce Equity Agreement has increased to $806 million of coverage that is now being implemented by 4 agencies. We were joined by Portland Community Colleges in this work this year. We're also able to report on total coverage of construction career pathways. So this includes projects that are working towards the workforce goals, but are not utilizing the workforce agreement due to their size, which is $1.2 billion of construction across 9 agencies in the region, where we're creating career pathways for BIPOC and women workers. For the projects covered by the Regional Workforce Agreement, we are meeting the 20% apprenticeship goal. We are exceeding our goals for BIPOC workers, where most of the projects are the hours completed by BIPOC workers is over 30%. And most of the projects are meeting or exceeding the goal for women hours worked by women, which is 9%. Some are exceeding, some depending on the types of work we are having to pay a little more attention to. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Cassie for our next metric.
Thank you. As Sabrina mentioned, we're learning more and more about how to better track impact. And as we look at what we're measuring today in our training efforts, we know there may be better indicators that may be more useful in telling the full story in the future. But I want to start with today. In our department, Nyla Moore leads the way to ensure we're providing advanced and foundational learning opportunities to increase equity and inclusion competencies for all of our staff. Through the investment of our training budget, we provided a variety of training with leading experts and educators, and we touch on topics such as privilege, disability and accessibility, gender equity, building diverse teams, and deepening our cultural humility. And over the past year, due to our partnership with HR, we've been able to offer thousands of hours through our virtual and on-demand classes that are available through Open Sesame, and have integrated DEI concepts into the new employee orientation program, which is just relaunched and doing in-person trainings. And several years ago, the required learning program was put into place. That truly helped integrate our values and is equipping all of our employees with ongoing diversity, equity, and inclusion education. The metric that you see here today focuses in on Metro's supervisors and managers, which, as you may know, that in particular are definitely a critical role to ensuring our workplace culture is more inclusive and welcoming. But the focus is on Supervisor Essential Series, which features the fundamentals of racial equity. a training class that is run by our department that helps managers understand the common terms and concepts and examples of exclusionary policies and the importance of creating an inclusive team. This series also touches beyond just those courses, classes such as emotional intelligence and fierce conversations and coaching for leaders. Our current equity metric here was a percentage of managers or supervisors who attended a mandatory DEI training, with our target being 80%. And just to give you a rough idea of how many managers we have currently, it's around 200 or so managers at any given time at Metro. While these are snapshots in time, and with turnover and growth and change in management, the total number of managers who've completed the Supervisor Essential Fundamentals course is around 167 managers, or 83% who participated in this required training.
Next slide, please. For our investments in the target areas, DEI's budget continues to reflect investment in construction career pathways, which offers both industry-specific impacts to the economy strategic target and a model for workforce development and considerations of other economic prosperity strategies. More broadly, we are working with the COO's office and other central service departments to determine how we can leverage our existing programs and resources to support the agency in having a unified approach to embedding racial equity in these priority areas. Next slide, please. For this coming fiscal year, FY 24-25, DEI's proposed budget is the result of significant staff engagement that really informed what was proposed to you today. I think in my, it'll be a year in this role next month. And working through this budget process with the team has probably been one of the most gratifying processes that I've been in since I stepped into this role. I think really being able to pull together, assess what our goals are, and to have real conversations about what it takes to do it effectively and ensure that staff are supported in that, and to get to benefit from their wisdom, experience, and commitment to this work was incredibly valuable. The proposed budget for this year includes an operating budget of just over $3 million, which will support 11 full-time FTEs. It includes $591,000 to support our programmatic work, and as a budget modification, $425,000 to continue the capacity building civic engagement grants program. Next slide, please. Our budget modifications are about building a solid foundation for the department to ensure that the programs we lead, the services we provide to the agency are resourced, and that we're building, we have a strong foundation for the update as we prepare for that lift. Starting from the bottom, the programmatic funds, the request for $100,000 one-time funding is to ensure effective resourcing for our current programming and staff. These funds will allow us to address some administrative gaps, increase resources for the employee resource groups, increase training resources, and ensure that our committee work is fully supported. Our second budget modification is the continuation of the Civic Engagement Capacity Building Grant Program. We're in the home stretch of the pilot round of funding, which provided 3-year grants to 5 CBOs to scale their civic engagement programs in the region. This program was an evolution of our relationship with CBOs that emphasized long-term relationship building rather than one-time engagement. I want to acknowledge the role my predecessor, Rahi Reddy, played in building this program and setting it up for success. I also want to thank Parks and Nature and WPEZ for their partnership and initial investment in this program. In particular, the ongoing coordination with WPEZ to connect grantee organizations to learning and engagement opportunities has contributed to building a culture of advocacy in communities that is expanding multi-generational, multiracial civic engagement opportunities related to the solid waste system. Through this program, each organization has taken a different path to build capacity in their work. It has resulted in expanded civic engagement infrastructure in East Multnomah County, Washington County, and Clackamas County. We have new civic engagement programming focused on youth. There have been additional leadership development cohorts each year. There's been development of curriculum to support leaders in the garbage and recycling system. And there's been new innovative technology developed to engage community members. This program was rooted in the strategic plan objective that focused on fostering sustained relationships with community partners, which required dedicated staff to work beyond administrative tasks to build trust and connect partners to opportunities throughout Metro. This work has been done and led by Amy True, who has built true partnerships that are mutually beneficial and building trust with our partners. And as a result, this relationship building and capacity built through this program, grantee organizations were willing and prepared to engage in Metro initiatives, including the Regional Transportation Plan, Urban Growth Management, and Solid Waste Facilities Plan. This grant has built lasting capacity through new positions. Organizations have secured additional funding and really built new capacity in different parts of the region. So this modification includes continuation of the funding that goes to community members, organizations that are doing civic engagement work, converting the limited duration FTE to regular status, and funds to do some evaluative work in collaboration with the first cohort of grantees to inform what the work will look like in the next round. That concludes our presentation, and I'll pass it back to you, Deputy Council President.
Okay, great. Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Sure. Nobody else is going to raise their hand. Yeah, go ahead, Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Deputy Chair, Deputy President Wong. First of all, question, I'm a little unclear as to whether the capacity building grants are all that's going to be spent on the current grantees, or whether there's going to be new grantees that are going to be allowed. And do we have a target for how many grantees? That's one question. Second question is, do we have a way of measuring or clearly identifying the phrase that was used in there called equity literacy? I'm a little puzzled by that one. And then this is just sort of my wish list. We've shown considerable success regionally in the construction career pathways. And I think that's great. We've sort of set sort of a standard, but we aren't primarily a construction entity. So is there any possibility of developing and it's some of the work we already do, but developing career pathway programs, or at least proposals that deal with arts careers, conservation careers, management careers, and governance careers? In other words, those are the things we do. I mean, we're not a construction entity, and I think that we could at least have some policies in that regard and broaden the kind of scope that we're talking when it comes to equity. So I'm just wondering if that's something that's possible to do.
Yes. Thank you for those questions, Councilor Rosenthal. So for the grant program, we're looking at a new cycle of grantees. We're going to do this evaluative work to really shape what that next round will look like. We did learn a lot about the grant size that's needed to actually build capacity for an organization. And I think we hit about the marker that we need to hit. And so that was 5 organizations. But I want to leave some flexibility to really learn from our partners and to shape that for the next round of grantees. So it would be a new cohort of organizations that we would be working with. on construction career pathways, and then maybe I'll hand it to you for the equity literacy one. Construction career pathways it's an interesting example of, I really think a lot about the convening power of Metro as an agency, because we aren't the biggest builder in the region. But we have been able to hold this unique space for the region and really pull folks together to do something powerful. I also think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to look at other sectors and industries that we have influence, that we have jobs in, to explore how we evolve and adapt the strategies we've created in the construction industry. So I think that is definitely, and that was part of the idea with the green jobs exploration. And so would love to continue that conversation to see where that could go. That's it.
Yeah, just comment. I know our arts facilities do quite a bit in this regard, but we don't call it as a specific program element. And maybe we should raise it to that level where we actually are, sort of making this look a little bit more of a marquee kind of concept. But anyway.
Thank you for the question around equity literacy. And I will say, my time being here and with Nyla Moore's leadership, we've been really kind of on this journey and unpacking what does it look like to increase the knowledge and our learning outcomes here at the agency. Coming later this year, we're going to be rolling out an equity and belonging training guide, which provides more clarity on kind of what are those, I guess you could call them learning targets or behaviors that we're wanting to see change and shift due to the training that we're providing. So we're kind of in that phase right now of what it's going to look like for us to better articulate and perhaps even measure the impact of not just the training, but how did that training impact somebody 6 months down the road, and see if their behaviors have changed because of the learning that we provided. But I would say we're really looking at building the foundation for learning and education. So that's going to be a learning track that we'll be providing consistently with our different trainers that we offer. We'll be really also looking at more of what we're calling the blue track, which is going to be focused on awareness and advocacy. So we're looking for markers in tracking people's kind of behavior change in those areas. But we'll have more to do around understanding how to better measure. But it really is about increasing the ability for people to not only understand concepts, but apply the concepts that they've learned in their training.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's go with Councillor Lewis, then Gonzalez.
Sure, thank you so much. I'm extremely supportive of what you've presented as a budget today, including the modifications. I think our grants have been really successful. I will call out that from the Clackamas County perspective, we should just make sure that we're emphasizing that the folks who are eligible should be in the cities of Clackamas County. So even if they don't cover the whole county, even if they're doing really good deep work in 1 or 2 cities, we should lift them up for their eligibility. I guess 2 thoughts for me. One, I'm disappointed that someplace within our agency culture, we have supervisors who look at something called supervisors essentials and think they have something else better to do. The core of your work in a supervisory or managerial role is taking care of people. And I want to set the example from the council that that is something to show up to. So if it's a metric that we're using, I would like to make sure that we're actually getting better than 80%. And I don't know how to be helpful other than saying it here on the record. It's important, folks, please show up. And if there are resource concerns or mixed messages that people are getting, I trust our COO will help cut through that.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I think some portion of that that number is likely just due to manager turnover and when we measured, but message received loud and clear, and we'll make sure to amplify that. Great, thank you.
And then my last bit is actually a question. If you could talk a little bit about the workforce investments that we're able to make with our workforce partners who are still struggling, coming from having had ARPA and other COVID related dollars keep them afloat for a few years. then they kind of hit a fiscal cliff and our big projects aren't online yet. So I'm wondering if our budget contemplates essentially kind of a relief funding valve for the time between COVID dollars running out and significant construction projects that we see very soon in the pipeline coming.
Yeah, so our budget does not include kind of that specific increase that you're naming. I think one of the place that we are having this conversation though to support our community partners, we're talking about the pre-apprenticeship programs that do the deep work with folks that really face the most barriers, is our regional collaborative funders table. So the 9 agencies that are implementing construction careers are all at the table together, figuring out how we can coordinate our funds. One of the conversations that we are having this conversation about what does it take for us to both figure out what that funding needs to look like in order for it to actually be helpful. Because I think sometimes we get caught in that system of just kind of keeping afloat. And what I think you're talking about is the growth that we're also going to need to see in these partners. So there's definitely more conversation to have around that piece. You know, I think another component of that conversation is with all of the big projects that are coming down the line, how are we ensuring that we're bringing those agencies into the conversation as well? So would love to continue to talk and strategize about those pieces as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Counselor Gonzalez.
Thanks, Deputy President Wong. Counselor Lewis took my question, which is great. The focus on construction careers, and I'll try and rephrase it so maybe there's still room to talk about it. But it's a really important project that we're working on. Before I get there, though, Sabrina and Cassie, I do want to thank you and congratulate you on your growing leadership at Metro, and thank you for your service to the agency and the work that you're doing, and seeing this presentation and the general indicators that you're working on, that you're advancing. It's really great to see how far the Sporetti has really left the mark at Metro, and how we continue to redefine what those standards should be for governance. So on construction careers, you know, with that element of some of these big projects that are coming online, and I want to know, and with recognizing too that we're in a bit of a transition as we're looking to hire a person to run this program, what do you see as the kind of the next steps, the next 3 years of what we want to do here? And also, I would love to find ways to get that regular information as we celebrate the, let me see, I have the slides up here up in front of me, that 806 million or 700 million, as those numbers start going up of projects that are within this agreement. What are the ways that the local grants and that money is really beginning to make an impact that we've been hoping for when we first set this in motion? So again, I think some of those things were covered, but I tried to reframe it to at least hear a little bit more about what you think is in store for us, and what you're kind of hoping for, planning for with this big phase of projects coming up, and anything else in particular that you might want to share. And if this is something that you want to kind of table and bring back to a future work session, I totally understand, but really razor focused on this construction careers program, and it's been really wonderful where we are. I'm excited. Thanks.
Great. Yes, thank you for the questions, Counselor Gonzalez. On the kind of what's next, I'll say some things that are on my mind and reserve the right to change them later once we get staff on board and we continue this conversation. You know, the top of my mind is our community-based organization partners, and continuing to build a strategy to support their growth. It is that, like, how we unlock that next level of capacity in that important part of the industry, I think is like the task before us. Two other things that I think about a lot are childcare. And that being just like foundational to people being able to move into this industry. And when we think about some of the big projects that we have coming up in the industry or in the region that are really big and place-based and they're gonna be there for a long time, there's a really exciting opportunity to do something special here that matches the hours and enables folks to take that leap. You know, I was at the Oregon Tradeswomen did the Women in the Trades kickoff event, and there was this amazing iron worker, a woman who's in leadership in her union now, that started her career as an iron worker in her 40s, and inspiring for so many reasons. And like the amount of support that someone needs in infrastructure, someone that has a family, to make a shift like that, and then to enter a powerful career like that, we need to make sure that infrastructure is there for folks. And then the last thing, another thing on my mind is we still have a lot of work to do on culture change on job sites. You know, I was in a meeting yesterday where agency partners are getting together to really think about, you know, there's the infrastructure we've created to report incidents. And then there's those incidents that don't get reported and people are just struggling through those. And that's, you know, it happens on all job sites across the region. And so our respectful workforce job sites training is a key part and step of that. And we have more work to do there. So on the reporting piece, for the regional project at the Regional Collaborative Committee, where all of the implementing agencies are, that is our big task for this year, is to be able to report out on a regular basis as a region on how we are doing on our goals, so that we can, one, be accountable to our commitments, but also so we, like, the value of that regional workforce data, I'm really excited about, and is gonna really strengthen our strategies. So more to come on that, and I appreciate your interest and continued support for this work.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. We all know there are some really big projects coming up that can be transformational for thousands of people that are interested in the trades and people that are in the trades already. So thank you, and excited to see the progress and appreciate the overview.
Great. President Peterson.
And thank you both for your presentation and budget and the good work that's been going on. I just wanted to take note, not for today, but I think for future conversations. We're still working on the strategic targets, and this will probably, you know, apply to every single conversation we have during budget season, but we're still working on the strategic targets. And I think I'm looking forward to that conversation with y'all about what are we trying to achieve. And I think that's where Councilor Gonzalez is going, is, you know, what is the arc of change here? And how are we going to measure it? And then just, I think, to note for possible council initiatives, there's been talk over the last several years, and I am 100% behind both of them, but I don't know where to begin these conversations or how to initiate it. Councilor Simpson has come to the table with a very specific thought process and has started work in covering our representation on workforce initiatives. But we haven't figured out what Metro space is in the bigger role for Metro. And I guess I just want to put an asterisk with yellow highlight that it's something that we've talked about, but I don't know how to start it. I don't know how to move it along to the next step, because I think it is, you know, we've heard bits and pieces of it here of like, what is our role and how do we move it forward? So I'd like to, you know, think about that more in the coming year. And then this daycare issue is gonna, like, it just circles the drain, right? For the entire state, for the entire nation. And I am not saying that Metro can solve this. It is one of the reasons we set up and sold the Johannes's position, right? Counselor Wong, but I guess I would also, same thing as like put an asterisk with a yellow highlighter. I don't know how to use Metro's convening power yet to deal with this because it's not Metro's authority, but neither is it anybody else's authority to deal with this issue. And yet it was called out as one of the, the biggest economic factors that we have in the region in our economic development plan with GPI. It is also not GPI's role. Right? It's there's no nonprofit and there's no public agency that is acknowledging the lack of daycare, showing where the lack of access is, trying to figure out just what is the list of things that makes it hard to create a daycare, to get the training, to get certified, right? To get that initial capital if you're doing it through the private sector. And I texted over to our friend Rakaya Adams, the model that they have in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then I'll stop talking. And she said that that's one of the things that 1803 is really going to be working on is daycare. But how do we work with them? How do we acknowledge this as a not just a regional problem, but a statewide problem? And how do we start pulling people together to actually get a plan to move forward, even if it's not something we necessarily do or implement, right? So I guess just those two things are important to just note for future conversations.
Thank you, President Peterson.
Thank you both. Sorry for the voice.
Great. So thank you for the presentation and have a great work. It's actually just been such a great pleasure to work with our core committee on racial equity over the last couple of years. And I think my question, kind of from discussions at CORE and just around the country, we know that diversity and equity and inclusion programs are under attack in a lot of places. And, in places like Florida, it's actually not legal to spend public dollars on DEI programs. So I'm wondering, do you have any initiatives or programs to kind of support DEI across the region more specifically? I think you had convened DEI professionals kind of semi-informally in the past. And I'm wondering, just kind of like given attacks happening all around the country and this kind of like narrative coming out, like how do you as a department think about, that and, what steps can we take to, advance our goals kind of along with our partners all across the region?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. That doesn't have a simple answer.
No.
DEI work has never been without opposition or backlash. It comes in different waves and forms over the years. And we are in a particular moment where the efforts are very intentional. They are deliberate and it's a unique brand that I think we're really trying to take the time to understand what is happening and to make sure that our responses don't diminish the work, but support the longevity of it and enable us to continue to do this work, which is really just is about enabling people to live full and healthy lives, acknowledging that there are past harms and there's been exclusion that has prevented that. And the reason that we all do this work is because we want to improve people's lives. So, you know, we are putting ourselves in spaces that enable us to be around folks who are doing the thought leadership in this area. We're going to the Othering and Belonging Conference tomorrow, where they have done some really proactive thinking about, you know, about this work. I also want to say that, you know, for the work that we do, we work really closely with our Office of Attorneys and Metro Attorney, and you know, we do work that is backed up by that advice. We are, you know, at the same time I stepped into this role, there was a massive kind of shift. There's lots of shifting in this field at and across the region. So a lot of the equity leaders at the different agencies are new. And so we're figuring out how we come together, especially in this moment. I think on the, you know, what we can do is, you know, this conversation and this, you know, about our budget and the resources it takes to do this work is a key part of it. I also, you know, there was a committee on human rights in Bend last week that was Zoom bombed by hate speech. There was someone, a community member had brought his daughter to that meeting as an opportunity to introduce her to advocacy and using her voice. And they had to sit through a lot of just hateful speech. And so it's not distant. I think for you all as our council to know the impact and the gut punch that is to the staff that do this work at this agency. So your continued support and also your voices are going to be what we need as we move forward. I am really grateful for the leadership that I get to do this work with. So those are my thoughts on that.
Okay, great. Yes, and yeah, I think it's just important for everyone to know how important DEI in this department is to this agency and this work. And I think we'll continue to support as best we can. And however, you know, you lead us. So thank you. Did you have a question?
You know, I raised my hand to raise this issue that you both raised, and I think you spoke to it, you know, better than I could. So I just am grateful for the support that this council shows this department. The work that this department and other equity leaders and leaders of color in this organization do is very personal, and we are in a period of it's not unprecedented because this work has been under attack and has had opposition from the beginning, but we are in a moment where there's a deliberate political and legal strategy to dismantle it. And I'm grateful we're in a place where we can resist that and continue to advance it and not just try to maintain.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Deputy Council President. I think in your phrasing of the question, you looked to Florida as an example of a place where legal strategies are being used to dismantle this work. And I can't let it pass by without actually bringing politics into this. And yes, there's the legal arguments, but there's also the political will to invest in this work. And Clackamas County has defunded their office. And I think it is important for us to say that as a region, we are wounded by Clackamas County disinvesting, by hurting their own staff, by hurting their own communities. And we need to just say it explicitly that Metro is here for folks in Clackamas County who need the support. This is a practice within government of how you engage, how you design policy, and how you do work that is for the entire community. So can't let it go by without calling Clackamas County out on something really critical to our work.
Thank you for sharing that. Counselor Rosenthal?
Yeah, just commented, I think it's important to note that this council fully supports the DEI work that you've been doing on the department. And I think that support is going to continue. We may face some, speaking of politics, we may face some significant challenges as the year goes by, and we may have to recalibrate, and we may have to express our support in even stronger ways. Keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you all. And thank you. Thank you for your work. All right, well, next up, we have a combined presentation for our council office, chief operating officer, and government affairs and policy development team. And representing these departments, we have Andrew Scott, deputy chief operating officer.
Good morning. Yes, joint presentation, but you just get me. And we do have a lot of other people who can help answer questions as well as we go through this. So we can go to the next slide. I'll go ahead and dive right in. So good morning, council. I'm Andrew Scott. I'm one of Metro's deputy chief operating officers. I use he, him pronouns. And I'm excited to be with you today. We're going to talk about progress. We're going to talk about these combined COO, GAPD and council budget. We're going to go through this same as you've heard from a lot of other departments. We'll talk about 23-24 budget decisions, give a broad overview of the 24 and 25 key issues. We'll talk about investments in our target areas, some key performance indicators, equity metrics, and budget requests. You have a lot of budget presentations today, and as deeply as I care about these three budgets, I recognize it may not be the most important that you're hearing about today, so I'll try and go quickly through this, leave time for questions, and we can move on to the next presentation as well. So next slide. For the current fiscal year, there were targeted investments within the Office of the COO, within our government affairs and council offices, as well as focused investments to support the Expo Futures project. Just want to cover some highlights of those investments. Within the Office of the COO, you approved funding for a project manager in the COO's office that would help manage the implementation of our reimagining policing and security work plan. The recruitment for that position was delayed this year because we really wanted to take time to thoughtfully develop the work plan. We wanted to engage with stakeholders. We do hope to have someone on board in that position by early June. Within government affairs, the government affairs GAPD's growing tribal affairs program has continued to support Metro's relationships with sovereign tribal governments who've helped better connect Metro to the land and community in the greater Portland area. A lot of investment has been directed towards staff training and development so that we can successfully partner with tribal governments and urban indigenous organizations. Also within GAPD, funding for the regional investment strategy, this in the current year has funded 2 polls in preparation for council's consideration of the zoo bond referral. It funded a conceptual poll on affordable housing funding options and focus groups and a poll out in the field early this month on climate change messaging. GAPD was also able to hire Marissa Grass from the WPES department as our new strategic engagement advisor. Marissa has already come up with plans to bolster regional connections, and she's developing a comprehensive council and staff regional engagement plan for this spring and summer. That's going to include strategic communications and outreach on affordable housing and urban growth projects. And GAPD is also working on the next round of Metro Mixers, which I know I've enjoyed. I think some of you have as well. Those are coming up in June with, again, the strategic engagement advisor playing a leading role in that. And finally, talking a little bit about council's current year budget. Last year's budget modifications, or actually the current year budget modifications, ensured that our year of service internship program could provide $20 an hour wages at minimum. And also the counselors and staff could take advantage of opportunities to travel for learning, knowledge sharing, and to build collaboration across the region. And finally, the Social Innovation Program has had a growing year, including establishment of the first ever Social Innovation Council in the region, which includes senior leaders from philanthropy, the public and private sectors. The program is also working on a large federal grant proposal within the Planning, Development, and Research Department. Next slide, please. And then lastly, you've heard a lot about the Expo Future Investment, but I didn't want this to pass without recapping a little bit of some of what's happening in the current year. I think the thing that team is probably most proud of is the large region-wide coalition that they've been able to build over this year, which is reflected not just in the governance committee volunteers that are helping to guide the project, but also in the business and government partners that are really excited and teaming up with us as we move forward on this project. We are looking forward to receiving the final report on the sports feasibility study from Hunden Partners this June, as well as continuing the community engagement work that's going to conclude in early fall. In a few slides, I'm going to talk about the 24-25 budget request for Expo, but I just want to note that in the current year, the project intends to spend its entire budget around community engagement, the sports feasibility study, and the travel and meetings. There is going to be some carryover in that project around strategic communications, marketing, project concept, and branding. This is primarily due to us being in the due diligence phase of that project. And so active marketing and communications campaign seemed a little bit premature. But we do expect to fully utilize those dollars as we move forward. And then a couple of things just to note, things to look forward to. There is a small group of project staff and committee members that's going to be visiting 3 sports tourism campuses in Birmingham, Alabama, and Memphis, Tennessee. That trip is scheduled in June, and it's really those sports facilities are a blend of public and privately owned facilities that have different partnerships and business models and different levels of public access. And those of you who are tracking this project know those are some really key questions as we're moving forward. And then the Historical Significance and Memorialization Committee is busy planning an intimate day of storytelling in June that is going to really try and connect the dots between the overlapping impact the Expo site has had on the 3 communities we are seeking to memorialize. And we'll let you know more about that as it gets planned. And I hope some of you will be able to make that event. Next slide. So just as we move into the fiscal year 24-25 budget, this is an overview of these combined budgets. It represents the staff and funding for council, the Chief Operating Officer's Office, and GAPD within the general fund. In addition to what you see on this graph, the office, the CO's office, also oversees the ERP systems implementation project. I'm going to talk about that in detail in a couple of slides, but I just want to note that the 4 FTE for that project, as well as project funding, are in a separate capital fund, so they're not included in the budget numbers shown here, but I'm going to go through that because it's a pretty major investment as we move forward. And then the budget amounts in FTE on this slide are inclusive of the budget modifications that are being requested of council for this next year. Next slide, please. I also wanted to take a minute to provide an overview of where we're headed with regards to strategic targets and performance measures. Council President Peterson noted it just in the last presentation on DEI. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how everything, how we're seeing everything fitting together moving forward. It's a little out of order. I know you've already heard from a number of departments around the budget, and they've been talking about their performance measures. But I know that Marisa touched on this in her proposed budget message. And so I just wanted to spend a minute expanding kind of on how all these pieces are fitting together. So as you know well, in June of last year, council began working towards a new strategic plan, identifying targets, strategic targets in the areas of the economy, environment, and housing. And you all adopted those targets in December. Over the course of the next year, staff are going to be supporting you in identifying the specific community indicators or population level metrics that are going to help us track progress towards those regional goals in those target areas. These community indicators are going to be externally focused measures that Metro can help influence through our policy, through our programming, or convening regional partners. In addition to that work, internally, our budget performance measures are used to track operational and service metrics, progress towards department strategic plans, and other measures that are more directly under Metro's control. As you've been hearing from departments over the last couple of weeks, and you'll continue to hear in the weeks moving forward, each department is sharing 2 or 3 of those measures as part of their budget presentations. And we're going to have a more robust engagement as we go into the 25-26 budget development, but we really did push departments this year to either, if they had existing metrics, that was great, or develop some metrics that related back to these strategic targets, but that, again, were a little bit more operational in nature. And so you're hearing as we go through, departments talk about that. And then the equity performance measures that we've actually been reporting on now for a couple of years are going to continue to specifically address equity issues within Metro. These are things such as reducing disparities in access and outcomes, increasing services to historically underserved populations. And then we're also layering that equity lens onto those budget performance measures and our community indicators. So we're going to be reporting disaggregated data wherever possible. Both FRS and DEI are working together to help refine how the budget and equity performance measures are going to be developed, presented, and analyzed moving forward. But I just want to note we're not, all those equity metrics are continuing on and actually being integrated into this larger work. And then our overall goal is really to provide the data and analysis to help Metro both understand our current state, analyze what's working and what's not working, and give you as council the data you need to make informed choices about our programs, our policies, and our operations in alignment with those strategic targets. We're going to continue to refine and adapt this framework and our performance measures over the next year. And again, these are iterative processes, but I just wanted to give a sense. And again, we can come back to this in questions if folks want to, if you all want to dive into this a little bit more. Next slide, please. So related to this, I wanted to touch on a critical equity metric that we've been monitoring and continue to monitor for the COO's office. And that really is the overall engagement, satisfaction, and sense of belonging from our Metro workforce. And specifically, we want to track the engagement scores of our BIPOC, LGBTQ+, VHE, those are variable hour, and our on-site employees. We're pleased to share that from 2021 to 2023, there was an agency-wide increase in overall employee engagement. So that's the good news. We also disaggregate that data, and it presents a little bit more of a nuanced or mixed story. When disaggregating by race and ethnicity, we saw increases in each racial category, with the exception of a subset of employees who choose not to identify a specific race or ethnicity. When we disaggregated the data by gender identity, we saw a decrease in the scores for our employees that identify as non-binary, genderqueer, or third gender, while employees that identified as either male or female showed an overall increase in engagement. And when we analyzed the data by disability status, we saw overall increases for both staff that do and don't identify as having a disability. We saw somewhat mixed results in our engagement scores for our variable hour staff. Those variable hour staff that worked over 600 hours in the past 12 months experienced a decrease in engagement, but VHE staff that worked less than 600 hours in the past 12 months experienced an increase in engagement. And lastly, while we saw increased engagement for both on-site and hybrid employees, we continue to see significantly lower engagement scores for on-site employees who are on-site 100% of the time. All of that is just to say that it's the data is actually really helpful for us to dig in and figure out where some of our issues are. It's great that we saw an overall increase in engagement. I think that's positive for the agency. But when we disaggregate and begin to see pockets where we're not only not seeing increases, we're actually seeing decreases, that's really valuable information for us as a management team to be able to go back and say, what's happening? Why are the experiences for those employees, whether there are non-binary or genderqueer employees, whether there are employees who are on site 100% of the time, what's the experience they're having that's different than their peers? And how can we really dig into that?
Andrew, just a clarifying question. Can you explain what the engagement scores mean? Like, is that from survey data? And
yeah, excellent question. Sorry. Yeah. So we, every 2 years, we do an employee engagement survey. And it is a combination of survey questions that are used nationally, right? So we can benchmark against lots of other organizations. We also add a number of equity-related questions for our workforce as well. And we try and keep the questions relatively consistent between surveys so that we can have some longitudinal data that we can sort of see whether we're having growth or decreases. So I mean, there are questions about whether you feel like you have growth opportunities at work, whether you have a sense of belonging at work, whether you feel like your manager or supervisor cares about you, whether you feel like you've got colleagues that you can relate to, those types of questions.
And when I see like when it's disaggregated for Black or African American, and there's a 0.32 increase, what does that 0.32 mean?
Yeah,
Is it
and
like-
let me actually apologize. I just realized about an hour beforehand, this graph got a little bit tweaked. And so the 0.09 is actually a summary. That's the overall growth, and it should be on a top line. And so 0.32 relates to the Asian or Asian American, 0.03 to Black or African American. It gets a little bit better as you go down the graph, but it did get a little bit tweaked. Specifically to your question, so for Black or African American, what we saw is a 0.03 increase in their engagement scores. For Asian or Asian Americans, we saw a 0.32 increase in their engagement scores. What that means is compared to 2 years ago, employees who identify as Asian or Asian Americans saw a 0.32 increase overall, which, you know, again, we saw as statistically significant.
Is that like a scale of like 1 to 10?
It is, yeah, and
1 to
it's
5?
the questions are on a scale of 0 to 5, and so again, we contract with an organization that helps us with the survey and analyze those results. I think what you see, the things that are highlighted in blue are statistically significant increases. The other increases that are not highlighted are increases or maybe even decreases, but they're not statistically significant. And then in the two sort of orange yellow are statistically significant decreases.
Are you saying that the rows should line up, but don't? I always have trouble when I see rows that don't line up and the 0.28, for example, does that apply to non-binary and transgender, or one or the other?
Yeah, they should line up. The minus 0.28 goes to the non-binary gender, genderqueer, or third gender. And then transgender, gender not listed, we don't have enough
Data.
employees,
Okay.
yeah, for the data. So I can get you a corrected chart. Again, we just realized this screenshot got tweaked as we came in.
Counselor Nolan, do you have?
Thanks. I would appreciate the lining them up so that my eyes don't have to do that. I'd also be interested in the raw data, by which I mean not just the plus or minus, but you know, what is the engagement score on average for Asian or Asian American employees, so that I can compare that to other groups here. The change is good to know, but it doesn't give me all the data I need.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to give you as much as you want. We can provide some additional data, and we could also schedule additional briefings for counselors who want to dive further in, because we have quite a bit here, and we actually have a pretty large effort to analyze this, and we've actually asked every department to dig very deeply into their data from this last survey and develop a department level plan on how they're going to respond to the findings.
And that's fabulous. I think it's really important to collect this data and to use it as you described to what's going on here? What do we need to change? That's what it should be used for. And I applaud that effort. I just like to know a little more about it myself.
Yeah.
Not the entire report, just a rewriting of this with an addition of 21 score, raw score, and 23 raw score.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Counselor Lewis, did you have a question as well?
Sure. In years past, we've been given the engagement survey results in a PDF emailed to us. It's not ever been in the budget presentation. I actually think it's great that it's here as something that's informing. But I would twofold. One, ask that we get the PDF because I haven't seen it this year. Could be my error not reading my email. But second, this is something that's actually probably worth a workshop because I think we're all wanting to dig in. It is not germane which line is on which. We need to probably actually digest and have an informed conversation.
Yeah. Great. And we flagged it here because this is one of our key equity metrics that we're tracking in the CEO's office. But happy to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
And go back. Yeah. Thank you. Great. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about one of the more significant budget modification investments that you're seeing in our 24-25 budget request. And that's to support the continued work of evaluating and enhancing our enterprise resource planning system, or ERP. And I'll try and make this as relevant as I can because it is a very technical system related thing, but also a very important one. So our enterprise resource planning system, or our ERP software, it's our core software that encompasses our financial and human resource data. And it really is the backbone of the work that we do. It's the backbone that supports the work that we do throughout the entire agency. It's pretty common for organizations to reassess these core software systems every 10 to 15 years. Our system in Metro has not had significant investments in more than 20 years, and it is overdue. And the need to revisit our ERP, it's really been identified from a number of ways. We've heard staff sort of raising concerns. We've had various audits that have talked about this. And some of the common areas of concern include a lack of training and systems knowledge, undefined governance and ownership of the system, staff experiencing incorrect pay and benefits resulting from changes that are made to the system, and the need to really fully utilize our software so that we have easier access to information that is accurate, timely, and can drill into specific details, and also more system automation. So Marisa asked me to serve as the executive and project sponsor for this ERP project. And we've made progress on two fronts so far. We've identified our ERP steering committee, which is made up of our central service departments heads from FRS, IT, and HR, and they are meeting regularly moving forward. And we've also hired a dedicated project manager, and I'm going to ask Heather Ann Brommel just to stand up so that we can identify her. So she's been with us for a while now. Is it 8 months, I think? Yeah. So Heather Ann Brommel is leading our ERP initiative. She comes to us with over 10 years of experience implementing ERPs and other large-scale systems in local governments in Oregon. And so we're really lucky to have her, and she's put together a project roadmap for the next 2 to 3 years. High-level project summary, and I'm going to keep it pretty high level, but we can dive into more details as you need or in separate briefings. Stage 1 of this roadmap is really intended to get a comprehensive assessment of our current enterprise resource planning system, a baseline of our organizational readiness for change, because that's one of the key factors in success, and then a recommendation on whether we need to keep or replace our ERP. So the key policy decision that we're trying to drive to is, and we use PeopleSoft right now, both on the HR and the HR and the finance side. Do we take our existing PeopleSoft system and essentially refresh it, which is still a pretty major project to go back and say, how are we using it? How do we want to re-implement it? How do we want to do things differently? Or do we switch to a brand new ERP? And that's really what this stage 1 is intended to get at. And as part of that, we'll develop full cost estimates for both the keep and replace options. And in order to accomplish this, we have a number of budget requests. Some of the budgets already in, some of our funding is already in our ongoing budget, some of it's new requests, but the total ERP related budget for next year is going to be about $1.4 million. This includes 4 FTE and other project costs such as consulting, training, and equipment costs. And then the new requests that we're coming to you for that are included as part of that 1.4 million is $466,000 in materials and services, 1 additional FTE in HR that will support the project, and then about $250,000 that we're going to use to backfill for subject matter experts who get pulled away. So as we implement these types of projects, we often go to our subject matter experts who know our systems really well. We say, we really need you on this project for 6 months, 8 months, 10 months. But of course, they have an existing job. So we've got some money in here as well where we can backfill as we pull those people into the project. I'm excited about this. I think it's long overdue, and I think we're going to have a lot of positives that are going to come out of this. I don't want to shy away from the fact that these ERP projects are disruptive and they are challenging to any organization. They typically take 4 to 6 years to complete. And if you wanted to Google them, you can Google lots of examples of ERP projects gone very wrong, particularly in the public sector and particularly in local governments. We're very cognizant of that. I actually lived through an ERP implementation in the city of Portland in the mid-2000s that ballooned to 4 or 5 times the cost. And again, all those articles are on the Oregonian. You can see, how quickly they can go wrong. We're really intent on doing this right. And it's one of the reasons I'm really excited. We have Heather Ann on board, who has done this successfully for Gresham and done it successfully for other local governments as well. And our roadmap, we're really leading with the staffing and organizational impacts first. And we're really focused on that organizational change management and making sure that's threaded throughout every stage of the project. Our end goal is to ensure that our ERP system is doing what we need it to do and that our technology is helping our employees get their jobs done rather than getting in the way. And I think right now it's getting in the way, which is why we're engaged in this project to begin with.
Do you have a chart that shows the changes of? You said, so the request and just money, I was looking for that and I couldn't find it.
I have, I'll talk, trying to see if we may not, I can get you something a little bit more detailed. If, yeah, I'm happy to provide a little bit more. I mean, it is in the budget information, but we can pull out some.
You can tell me what page, and I can look, I was just trying to find it.
Yeah, let me, let me finish the presentation, but we'll see if Cinnamon or Brian can figure out where in the budget document we might be able to point you. And if not, we can pull out some additional information and get it to you.
Great. And President Peters had a question as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Andrew. How are we going to get a separate presentation in the future? I don't want to take up a lot of time here, but it sounds like, based on lessons learned, you have started to think about how to manage the risk of this. And I would just love to hear that now or later of those lessons learned and how we are managing risk. And I'm assuming you're managing it, some of it based on these stages, and getting an agreement on exactly what we do need to change and what we don't need to change, and whether software can do that or not in the future is a conversation further down the road. But getting alignment on what we actually want to achieve, is that part of it? Or
Yes. Yeah, you've nailed it. That's exactly what the first stage is really about. What do we need to achieve, and how do we get there? Most of these projects fail because organizations don't do the change management work up front and the people management work. And you know, the reality is technology can't solve broken business processes. And so I think this is exactly to mitigate the risk is why we're really focused on how do we map out all those business processes? How do we say, hey, what are we doing really well? What are we doing inefficiently? How do we need to fix those things before implementation? I think what you'll find, and the conferences I'm going to and the things that I'm reading about this, all show a very, very similar path of if you try and just implement a new system, hoping it's going to fix those things, it never does. And in fact, that's where it breaks apart. To your larger question, I am more than happy if council's interested to schedule a work session and come back and again, bring Heather Ann up to talk very specifically about what we're doing to mitigate that risk and move forward. I always hesitate on these things because this is one that's very important for the organization, and it's also very in the weeds. So I would defer to you and council how much you want to know and be briefed, and we're happy to give you as much time as you'd like to spend on it.
Sure, I appreciate that. I also think that this type of work sometimes leads to internal public agencies thinking that they can fix a software problem, and then leading to a lot of delays, because normally bureaucracies don't have the technical skills to actually create a whole new program. Anyway, so I think I'd love to hear more, and I'll leave it up to the council of whether it's just me, about what the risks are at each stage and how we're identifying them and mitigating them, and not relying just on internal assumptions. Thanks.
Next slide, please. So just to touch on some of the other budget modifications for this office, within government affairs, there's $300,000 requests for ongoing funding for opinion research and contracted strategic support. There's a request for increasing the regional investment strategy to $225,000 to support communications on various measures. And then a $46,000 request for tribal affairs for engagement and tribal event sponsorship. And within the council office, council is requesting a 1-year extension on the limited duration social innovation program manager. That's a $211,000 request. I think, as you probably know, the position was hired about 6 months into the 2-year duration of the position. And this request is to keep the position funded throughout all the way through June of 2025. And then council also is requesting $25,000 for programmatic budget related to that work. And then also within the council office, additional requests for resource capacity for an additional FTE at $197,000 and then $250,000 for additional materials and services. And then next slide, please. And I think this is the final one to talk about budget modifications. Just to orient you on this graph, this is the Expo Futures project, excuse me. The blue lines represent the amount budgeted for each line item. The orange line is the amount actually spent, and the green line indicates if the project will spend out the budgeted amount this fiscal year carried over to next fiscal year. And the fiscal year 24-25 budget modification request for Expo Future is $190,000 additional funding. Those dollars will add to the existing funding in the current year and really allow the team to expand committee and engagement stipends, expand community outreach and engagement, do a tribal requested cultural resource assessments, both for the Expo site and the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project. Start initial master planning work, which is not likely to start until the end of the fiscal year, but may need to start in between April and June of 2025. And then the budget also includes $91,000 of additional funding for strategic communications, site visits, and tribal engagement stipends. And with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. President Peterson.
Thanks. I think my question is to our COO, Marisa, about the Social Innovation Director position. I understand the carryover, but when do we take a limited term and make it a full FTE? I don't know if the council has set up success measures or looked at what we intend to do with that, because we had a resiliency position that ended, and then there was no plan for what to do with the work. So I don't want to be in that position again, and just have a conversation up front about when does it transition to an FTE or no longer move forward. Thanks.
Thank you, President Peterson. There's no hard and fast rule on that transition. That is really up to council. So, at the point that I'm not as familiar with that body of work as Kristen may be, or other folks on your staff, but that is really at your discretion. So we could, the budget is there for the position. You can turn on the permanency of that position at any point that you determine that that's what the program needs.
Okay, I guess we'll leave it in the. I don't intend to ask for it to be a full FTE now, but I guess we should have a conversation as a council of what it means to move it to a full-time FTE and what we expect to see next year and beyond if we were to do that. So again, another asterisk and yellow pen.
I'm getting a thumbs up from Kristen across the room, so
thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I have a couple of comments and actually questions. First of all, I'm disappointed to see in presentation of additional budget requests without any monies attached and without a chart showing that. I mean, I think that would be fairly simple to do. You go through it fairly quickly, and I'm not supportive, but I think it would be better information if it was provided, or at least a reference to the pages in the budget document. In that regard, I noticed that one of the charts you presented showed 45 FTEs projected, but in the budget chart for the chief operating officer, it shows 49. I'm not sure. I think they're not exactly the same charts, but I don't know what the difference in the 4 FTEs is. That's probably the main question I have. And then in a little bit lighter note, I will note that in looking under the council office, the second bullet, this is where I've suggested that maybe we have a role for AI. I read the second paragraph about 4 times and it really says nothing. And maybe AI would say something a little bit more specific. It says it's nice words, but it's bureaucratese. And budget, I understand budget processes always involve a lot of bureaucraties sometimes without much substance, very generalities, but it's a little disappointing sometimes that it's a little not more concrete. So when we're talking about economic development, and having everybody have more economic mobility, that really doesn't say anything. AI might give us a little better wording.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide a follow-up chart that can talk about each modification package and the dollar amounts. We'll do that right away. In terms of the FTE, that was one of the things I noted back on that slide 5, that the 4 FTE are ERP related. So what that slide showed.
Wait, you said 4 FTE are what?
They are ERP related, so
They
the
are
enterprise
ERP.
resource planning. And so that slide, as I think I noted, shows the general fund positions. Those other positions for the ERP project are in the CO's office, but they're funded from a different fund, which is why they didn't show up on that particular chart.
Okay. Incidentally, ERP is not even listed in the glossary. Minor point.
Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you, Andrew. I want to thank you for your presentation. I know you actually kind of had the Island of Misfit Toys as your theme today, and the fact that you're able to keep all that together in your role working with only one other deputy. We have jurisdictions of much smaller size that have 3 and 4 deputies. So I think you're tracking a lot, and the opportunity to advance a high risk, high reward computer and technical endeavor, I think is upon us. And thank you for giving us the high level without getting in the weeds. It's not our role. But I would hope that we get some either quarterly or twice a year, kind of how it's going. Did we take the right risks? Are we gonna face that kind of resource challenge? So I say full steam ahead. Government is not known for its smarts around computer and technology investments. We always try and reinvent the wheel. So I'm glad that you're looking at the system we have, what a refresh of the current system would be versus the benefit of a different system. So I really appreciate that planning oriented approach and the 4 steps you laid out. So thank you for bringing that to us.
And specifically on that, one of the keys to success of those projects actually is the governing body both being aware and asking the critical questions as we go along. So I appreciate that you do want to be briefed on it and interested, because I think that is important for you to say, like, wait, why is, how long, why is it taking that long? Why is it costing that much? That's a key factor of success as well. So
I'll just pile onto that a little bit. I think, we have every confidence in Andrew's leadership on this project. We also have several members of our senior leadership team, myself included, Holly, Brian, our CFO, who have been through ERPs before. And so rest assured, we will be bringing every lesson learned from those experiences to this process as well. And I think it is a technology project, but as Andrew mentioned, that the change management and the business process are as if not more important, because the software does what it does. It's the human elements that can be challenging. So it's also why that the funding that Andrew talked about for backfilling people is so important. Our strategy is to put our A team on this project. So our best subject matter experts that are working here day to day are going to be shifted to the project, and we'll be backfilling them, because that's how you get the best results in a project like this. So like Andrew, really appreciate your attention to this project going forward.
Great. Seeing no other questions. Great. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. Okay. Our last budget presentation today is the proposed budget for Parks and Nature. And today we're joined by John Blasher, Director of Parks and Nature, and Shante Clark, Parks and Nature Finance Manager.
Good afternoon, Council President Peterson, Deputy Council President Wong, and councilors who all just stepped out for a bio break, it looks like. You have just me today, and I will just jump into it unless you want me to wait for your colleagues.
Should we
We have
wait?
quorum, because we have 2 online.
Okay, you've got folks online.
Yes.
So,
Go ahead, please.
thanks. Once again, good afternoon. Your Parks and Nature Director, John Blasher. You see him, his pronouns, here today to present on proposed FY25 Parks and Nature budget. Go to the next slide, please. Today I'll cover similar topics as the previous departments, hear about some of our investments in this current fiscal year, get an overview of the FY25 proposed budget, hear some discussion on some performance measures for the budget, our equity metrics, investments in the target areas, our slight budget modifications, and then look forward to some discussion with the council. Go to the next slide, please. As you all well know, the mission of our department is to protect water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, and create opportunities for folks to enjoy nature close to home through a connected network of parks, trails, and natural areas. We have 3 core functions around land acquisition and restoration, operating and running our regional parks and education services, as well as providing funding through grants to local partners and nonprofits. Some of the things I wanted to highlight for this last or current fiscal year is up on the screen here. So local share is one of the big pieces I wanted to highlight. We've awarded $17.2 million to 3 park providers over the past year. Local share is that key way that Metro Parks and Nature bond measure can help to support projects that are important to towns, communities, and neighborhoods across the region. Tigard, North Clackamas Parks and Rec District each just used over $1 million of their local share to fund new parks, and the city of Portland received $11.6 million for a series of projects, from building trails to increasing accessibility to replacing lighting. Many of you joined us in Beaverton when you approved the $2.3 million for 15 parks and nature projects that community members imagined, developed, and voted on. Those Nature Neighborhood Community Choice Grants pilots was really a highlight that we've had so far this year. And we appreciate folks getting out to Hillsborough to see that. Other large investments we have are in the Regional Blue Lake Park. A lot of big work going on the ground and with community members. The park has been closed for the past few months while construction is done to update some of the park's infrastructure. And meanwhile, community members are working with our park planners to design the renovations that will allow the park to continue to serve generations of visitors. Also at Lone Fir Historic Cemetery, the team designing the Cultural Heritage and Healing Garden has developed its initial designs, and members of the Chinese American community have been deeply involved in this important project. In terms of some of the budget modifications from past fiscal year, we had requested 2.5 in the last fiscal year. The 0.5 was to fill out a 1.0 limited duration FTE for the Reimagining Police and Security policy work. That is a work out of class opportunity that we're working through final things with HR. So we hope to announce that there soon, so that work can continue on the action plan that our department developed in collaboration with the COO's office. The other 2 positions was an archaeologist and a cemeteries and business services manager. Both those positions have continued to go through some extended scoping with CAM to coordinate with the Capital Asset Management Department and with GAPD and the Tribal Affairs policy work to make sure that we're getting the right structure for those. Some other positions that we had requested in previous fiscal years, I wanted to remind the folks, one of them was a tribal affairs planner. We have someone that started in that position, and it's been really helpful for us to move our work forward, along with the safety and emergency coordination and training manager that have been really, really helpful for our team. Next slide, please. So big picture, looking at next year, our overall proposed budget is $92.7 million and 446.3 FTE. Approximately 63% is from the 2019 bond and 34% is from our operating fund, with the other sources making up the final 3%. As a reminder, we do hold the additional fund balance on the bond as we continue to spend down funds with a target of full spend by 2031. Next slide, please.
Deputy President. Back to the previous slide, your operating fund, how much of that is levy versus our general fund?
The levy represents about 80%.
Okay, thank you.
This next slide is getting into our operating fund. Overall, the operating fund is 42 million, about 109 FTE. You can see the bulk is in personnel services, it's about 40%. And then our M&S makes up another about a third. And then the last 17% or so is in transfers, with a lot of that being from the cost allocation plan. As a reminder, the operating fund supports all of our park operations, habitat restoration, our operations and maintenance in our parks, some of our education and stewardship, the levy grants, community investments, our communications efforts. I want to highlight, you've seen in previous presentations from your CFO describing some of the headwinds that our operating fund has experienced since the 2020 pandemic. That's resulted in some reduced general fund allocations along with increased cost allocation plan transfers. All that combined with some general inflation, increased labor costs, and an expanding portfolio of sites to manage and services to provide. We've been able to effectively manage through the structural operating deficit through the underspend in reserves. Now that we're more fully staffed and operational, underspend in reserves were a short-term strategy. So we'll continue to manage our budget and spend intentionally and explore more options to be balanced and sustainable moving forward. As part of this process, the COO has proposed for the FY25 budget to return general fund allocation back to and actually above pre-pandemic levels, which will help. Also, you'll see the COO, CFO coming back with an amended FY25 budget with a 1.2 million reduction in the operating fund deficit as we're doing some moving around with services and personnel that can be coded to the bond or levy instead of on the general fund. So we're working on making sure that all those things are right-sized. Next slide, please. Moving over to the bonds, we have 62 million budgeted in bond funding for FY25. 6 million of that will cover 37.4 FTE, 29 million towards our materials and services, and 22 in capital outlay, as well as 4 million in transfers. As a reminder, the M&S budget is high because that's how we carry grants and local share funds on our books until they're transferred to the local agency and capitalized on their books. So, and the estimate is that in this coming fiscal year, we'll spend about 13% of the bond funding. And cumulatively, the bond admin rate has been about 15 to 20%, which is coming down year over year. Next slide, please. So shifting a bit into the budget performance measures that we're proposing, we have 3 that we're looking at: land acquisition, habitat restoration, and park visitation. So you'll see in the next 3 slides some snapshots and placeholders of some charts and graphics for us to consider. The first one here is from the very first green spaces bond measure in 95. A key metric of our department has been the number of acres that we've helped bring into our system, the regional system of parks, trails, and natural areas. At the end of March this year, we've purchased 163 acres this fiscal year. And over the course of the 2019 bond, we've purchased more than 690 acres. The natural areas we've purchased, along with parks, cemeteries, and other land Metro took over from the county back in the 90s, has allowed us to work towards meeting Metro's climate goals and resilience goals. Metro's work towards strengthening forests and wetlands, making them more resilient to the effects of climate change, to help make sure that our habitats are healthier and stronger, and that more folks in the region are able to benefit from the values of these investments. Next slide, please. Also related to the environment is our habitat restoration work. So some of these should look familiar from our annual reporting, but our work with nature to make the region more resilient to climate change is much more than simply purchasing land. Every year we're investing in projects that give nature a boost to heal and become healthier. We remove small dams on streams, which cools water for migrating fish. We remove ditches, which allows creeks to spread into their floodplains, which soak up excess water during major storms. The planting projects on the slide are major undertakings as well. Each planting includes tens of thousands of shrubs and willows, trees, and we spread seeds by the tons, much of which are seeds that we use are grown or inspired through our Native Plant Center. And so these are some of the major investments in nature that have both immediate and decades-long, or maybe even centuries-long impacts across the region. Next slide, please. So this chart is a placeholder, help visualize some of our attendance and visitation data. We do an approximate of the number of visitors based on car counts, trail counts, and this data that only goes up to 2022 is actually pulled from approximately 12 sites because we don't have great data tracking from all of the different sites and historic cemeteries that we have. I will point out that in the end of 2022, we projected about 2.7 million visitors, and I just pulled some data from this past year, 2023, we had 2.87. So definitely growing, increasing with the number of visitation. And annual attendance numbers are often used as a baseline measure of performance in parks departments across the nation. While it's not precise, year to year, the metric allows for a unit of service comparison across annual budgets. Changes in visitation may have multiple factors, but also give department leaders an indication of guest satisfaction and or how a property or department meets recreation and nature demand. Evaluating visitation at each specific site can also give us some early indications of need for additional staffing or redeployment to meet service demands. As you can see, our service numbers, visitation numbers show an increase. And some of that could be due to the 2 new parks that we've opened. Definitely as we've gotten into that 2.8 million visitors this past year. It's also important to note that as this upward trend is continuing, we've serviced this with roughly or largely the same amount of frontline staff and capacity, and in some cases less, as the hiring environment for the last 3 years has been challenging. So as the portfolio grows, we expect to see visitation increase as well. We expect to see some renewed interest in sites that are getting a lot of our bond-funded upgrades like Blue Lake and Oxbow, Lone Fir, and portfolio-wide with some of our ADA and accessibility upgrades. Some of the work too is our team will need to go back and we want to revisit and clean up some of our 2023 and year-to-date numbers as well, and make sure that we're getting some good numbers from our newest parks of Newell and Chehalem. But sometimes those car counters go down, and keeping up with some of the tech out there can be a challenge. Next slide, please. So shifting into the key equity metrics, again, this should be familiar. We've presented this before. One of the things I wanted to highlight was that the 2019 Parks and Nature Bond, we set a target floor to direct a minimum of 20% of contracted dollars to COVID certified firms. We've actually nearly doubled that goal in the past 2 years, hitting 38% this year. And coincidentally, our overall department COVID firm usage is also 38% in contracted dollars. A lot of the credit for this success goes to Council and our colleagues in the DEI department for encouraging us to set these types of goals. And we're really proud of the work that we're doing out at Blue Lake Park, which is one of the first uses of Metro's C2P2 dollars. Next slide, please. So looking at the council investment target areas of the environment, economy, and housing, our work primarily touches on council priorities around the environment and somewhat on the economy. The primary impact is on the environment by investing in the protection and restoration of healthy habitats and ecosystems, and as well as creating opportunities to connect with nature to inspire shared stewardship. Through bond and levy work, we've added 18 new properties to the management portfolio and are working on restoration efforts to preserve habitat and provide connections to nature. And as mentioned, we've been working on our keeping that floor and exceeding that floor on our COVID utilization. Some other things I wanted to flag for the environment is also looking at how we've electrified some of our fleet at 2 of our sites, how we're using and implementing the sustainable site standards, where we also have opportunities for guest education at our parks on waste. And then obviously our land acquisition and restoration work. On the economy side, some of our work around the COVID utilization, as well as the number of construction projects that we have through the bond. And we've been looking to collaborate on green workforce development with our colleagues in DEI and in WPES. On the housing side, don't have quite the same touch, but through the large scale community visions and the nature neighborhood programs in the bond, both of those grants, we provide language in there thinking about how we're reducing any of the ill effects of park development and increasing housing prices or making housing less attainable. And specifically in your community visions program area, looking for grants or proposals that combine green infrastructure, habitat, along with either transportation, housing, or workforce development. Next slide, please. Wrapping up on the last slide, budget modifications, they are small. We're requesting additional funding to continue the community engagement work that is not capitalizable under the bond for the community choice grants, making. The pilot round was a success. These dollars will allow us to provide another round of funding. And the money, again, needs to come from the operating fund because the initial phase of ideation does not meet the threshold for capital asset planning. And we do have additional needs But with the levy resources being flat and previous additions, we're looking to this year to address service needs and work to keep some of our expenses low to avoid any additional drops in our fund balance overall. As mentioned, we continue to face some headwinds in our operating fund. So we're being really careful how we manage to maintain a healthy financial position now and in the future. And that we can go to the last slide, which is thank you for your time and I welcome questions and comments.
Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. Really appreciate the presentation, particularly in context of the different funds you're managing. You do have a lot of sources of revenue and probably as many restrictions as any agency or any department within the agency. My question is regarding community choice. Those are obviously very successful grants. Well, they're very fresh. But the process was very successful. How will you select the target area for the next round?
Yeah, we actually just got a presentation from our team and we're going to be bringing a proposal forward to Marisa to consider and then on to the council. But we're really looking at where's there some District 4 was where we had the last one. It was very successful. So we are looking at using some of our equity focus area overlaps along with some data on where there are park and green space deficits using data from Oregon State's parkland map and the Trust for Public Lands mapping. And so we have a proposal, but I don't want to get too far ahead of that before I run it through the process. But that's how we'll be looking at that and hoping to be able to make some decisions, recommendations this spring and summer to launch the program in the fall. And then that process will take, we've learned it takes quite a while to go through more community ideation, but that's the process that we're looking at to select the next target area.
Wonderful, thank you. I think I might imagine where that could end up based on what you just said. And I would be very supportive of that, particularly in the context of hopefully it'll be round 1, round 2, and then we'll have a round 3, 4, or 5 into the future. So I just don't want us to continue to one-off these if it's something we can make a regular practice of.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're committed to this second round. We haven't yet come back to you all if we're doing rounds 3, 4, 5, but one of the things we have been doing is looking to incorporate those principles of participatory budgeting and sort of that more kind of broad global look at how we defer decision-making where possible across all of our grants and funding programs. So while we might not do this exact same community choice grants program, we are definitely implementing those principles. But as we get into this second round, we'll definitely come back to you all. And if that's something that we want to do, rounds 3, 4, and more, can certainly bring that to you all.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. My comments are going to be a little bit like a Chinese soup, sweet and sour. First of all, I'm a strong supporter of the Parks program. I think it's done wonderful things, got great properties in. The community choice grants have been very successful and I look forward to continuing them. Our support for the local parks departments that we interact with is also a big element. So there's a lot of positive things going on. I would like a couple of comments I have though. First of all, I'd like to know, I noticed that the chart indicates we're adding 7.5 FTEs and I was a little unclear from your presentation whether those were the things you mentioned or those were the things that were still on hold. So a little bit more detail on what those who those are. Those specific 7 FTEs or just because of the larger share of field work that we're doing because we have more abilities to or more responsibilities now that we have more land. I mean, it could be. So I'd just like to know a little bit more detail on that. And then on the slightly sour standpoint, I suppose you'd say, is I'm a little surprised that the budget doesn't have a particular proposal, a particular outlay, or a particular pilot study for improving access to the parks. As you know, that was part of the audit, and that's been one of the criticisms. And there is nothing in there that indicates that we're going to be addressing that access issue in any proactive sense, whether it's shuttle buses or pilot studies or something like that. So I'm a little disappointed in there. And then I'd have to say the text write-up, again, I will make my comment about AI. I read the text write-up and it really didn't provide me with any actionable information. AI might help us write those a little bit more concisely and a little bit either shorter or a little bit more focused. It reads nicely and talks about generalities, but it doesn't really talk about the specifics of what we actually have been accomplishing with the Parks Department. For example, I mean, talk about, you looked at the visitor generation. We're going to be doing a lot of improvements, or we are doing a lot of improvements on Blue Lake Park. That'll probably improve and increase the number of visitors that we can have and handle at Blue Lakes Park, which is a great thing. And but by the way, when are those improvements going to be completed? So I'll just leave it there.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. The 7.5 FTE, I should have known this was coming because I watched the other presentations. That's the communications department. So as you may recall, the communications department has been centralized, and there is a shift where some of those FTE that were central communications staff that actually worked in those storylines are moving into those departments. So it's a net neutral shift, but we're just showing that in the budget. And so I realized I should have mentioned that. So those 7.5 are existing communications people that have been doing Parks and Nature work, but were coded and budgeted in the central communications.
Okay, so that's a shift.
So it's just a shift that's happening there. And then in terms of the access to, or the improved access to parks, as you recall, we briefed you and some of your colleagues on the coordination that we've been doing with the planning department through the regional transportation plan, looking at access to transit and sort of what that last mile is. And we've also been collecting some data to understand what is the proximity of our current parks to some of those services, and trying to help work with you all with existing resources to help ask and answer some of those questions of how and where do we want to prioritize this work, and where does this work fall into Parks and Nature realm specifically, and where does that fall into our colleagues in the planning and transportation. So we didn't add any additional budget, but I recognize too, we didn't talk explicitly about it in this budget. The other thing I'll mention that we haven't come to you all with yet, but we're planning, is to respond to the bond audit that the auditor's office did that talked about defining how is this bond set up and prepared to improve access and equitable access across the portfolio. So we've got a plan to bring this back to you this spring, early summer, if you will have us, to share some of the updates and engage in council with a conversation of, as a department, we have different definitions of access, whether it's proximity, amenities, is it the participation in it? And so we want to come and have a discussion with you all to help get some confirmation and alignment in that broader definitions of access, and proximity and access to those different facilities can be a part of that. So we didn't call out any additional budget for that, but we will be addressing those pieces there. And then to your other question about Blue Lake, you can see a little bit more of that in the schedule on the CIP. So for the Blue Lake Curry building replacement, that's happening right now. We should hopefully have that almost done this, if not this fiscal year, early next fiscal year. That's our maintenance and operation. We've already completed the vast amount of the infrastructure for connecting to municipal water and updating the water and sewer line. I don't think those things are going to draw more visitors, but for our park operations and maintenance staff, it's a lot less things to fix that break, that are, 50 years old. The other next big thing is around the Blue Lake Park renovation. And so that's where we're really getting into visitor experience and additional amenities. We're projecting that the bulk of those construction projects will take place in fiscal years 26 and 27. Right now, we're doing a lot of the community engagement pieces. However, some new things that should be coming back online, knock on wood, and being able to reopen the park this May, maybe slightly before or like right after Memorial Day, but people should be able to see that we've got the upgrade to the new fishing pier, the ADA accessible fishing pier, as well as a very nice, beautiful, it's not a welcome center, but it is it's an operational site for our office staff, and it's a place for guests to come in and get checked in, ask questions and things like that. And it's much better than the tiny little house that we had out there. So that center, last time I was out there, there's a roof on the building. I think all 4 walls are up, and would love to take counselors out there. Counselor Simpson?
I just passed by there yesterday. It is.
We'll get you out on site. There's no more dangerous trenches and holes all around the property. But so those are some of the investments that we'll see coming out through the bond. And I appreciate your comments on how can this budget document or other things that we do read more clear and accessible of what do these dollars and funds actually do and contribute. Yeah, I don't know if AI or large language models will be the ones to fix that, but
let me just, so I just want to understand, I mean, so some of the capital I noticed there's quite a shift in the capital budget expenditures between the last 3 years. So some of that is in 24, 25, but a big chunk of it is not until 25, 26.
yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, so
For
with
Blue
Blue
Lake.
Lake, we broke it into several different projects to try to do a better job of compartmentalizing and understanding those, and many of them are related, but it's, yeah.
And just a comment, I'm aware that we have been doing a lot to deal with some of the access issues, but I was a little surprised not to see it called out specifically in the budget document.
I appreciate that, and we can look to make any of those changes. Thank you.
Great. President Peterson.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Much appreciated. I just wanted to kind of also put an exclamation point. I think you did a great job of answering the question about access. There's a lot of different ways to define access. And I think that the more clarity we get around the different types of access that we're looking at is helpful because of the work that was done to pass the bonds and the campaign kind of talk about access, right? And I think what we really tried to highlight there is that Metro's role on the grand scale is to be able to get a lot of acreage under direct public authority so that we can do the restoration. And I think showing part of that access is everything that you mentioned, but it's also a little bit more clarity around when lands that we've purchased could become accessible, our expected time range. Maybe it's 30 years, maybe it's 50 years, maybe it's 5 years, right? Because of the habitat restoration that's going on. I think we should just be clear about kind of the timeframes so that we are acknowledging that we are purchasing property that may not have people on it for quite some time. And we're doing that on purpose. And I think that's something that was not accounted for in the audit. But there are so many other different ways in which we are looking at accessibility that need to also be clearly articulated and thought out. And I appreciate everything that you mentioned. And I think it feeds right into the scoping of the Metro 2040 to 2070 or 2075, because we did not look at access to the greater population. Does somebody have a pocket park? Does somebody have access to walking, to something that's much larger? So thank you. I appreciate that. On the grand scale of things, thank you so much. I think Parks does a great job with graphics and performance metrics and trying to tell stories. And I think there's just the end of the storyline for me in your graphics is acres purchased, projects delivered, but then what are the actual outcomes? And I think that's where Councilor Rosenthal was trying to get to a little bit of over time. We have talked about bringing salmon back into these streams, removing the culverts, replacing and water quality and air quality. And I don't know how to end the sentence of the story because projects are projects, but the outcomes are the more important thing. And that's what we sold it on. And I know it's like extremely difficult to say, oh, the 1,200 trees we planted in Chehalem Park, right, add to X amount, but we can do some extrapolation to talk about how we're working towards cleaner, right? So I think just trying to figure out the arc of that story for me, it's the outcomes. We could do 2 projects and have greater outcomes. We could do 20 projects and have greater outcomes. I don't know, right? But are we getting to the outcomes that we wanted?
Thank you, President Peterson. And yeah, we will be coming back to you all as well on the bond outcomes work that we've spent a lot of time on, that we'll get into that deeper detail of. And there's I got a presentation on that just last week. So there's some really good work that we'll be bringing forward to you all as well on those outcomes.
I'm excited. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Great. Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you and your team for focusing broadly on access. And specifically, I have encouraged you and been delighted that you're responding to make sure that we pay attention to access within the context of our racial equity values and policy. I'd also like to push us all to think that access isn't all that matters. But if we're investing public funds, both in capital and in operations, our equity goals should be around utilization. Because making something accessible, but perhaps not appealing or compelling enough to serve all of our constituency doesn't get us all the way there. And I know you hear this message, but I just want, in the context of this budget discussion, I want to make sure that we're thinking in terms of not just having our parks and nature properties accessible to people, but also serving their needs for connection with nature, their needs for connection with being part of habitat preservation. And that's utilization. It's a very difficult thing to measure. I will grant you that. And it's easy to count the cars in a parking lot to estimate how many people are attending or using that facility, utilizing it. That doesn't tell us how many BIPOC people are able to utilize, not just able to, but interested in utilizing it. So if there is some piece of your budget, if there's some element that you need to add something new to the way you can collect data, now's the time to raise that for us. It makes us step out of our boxes of the way we measure some things. And if it takes staff or contracts or something like that, I think it's worth investing in. And I'd like to hear, maybe not on the spot here, but if there are things we can support you with that would make it easier to measure the results that we're getting.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think you're spot on. I didn't go into that detail, but with the attendance, it's not disaggregated, right? It doesn't get into the specifics of who's actually showing up or when or where. It's an indicator of, like you said, how many vehicles and things are coming in and kind of what's that estimate. The last time I think that we did much more of that in-depth sort of capture in time and like touch points with visitors was a study that we did at Blue Lake, and I think it was in 2017, maybe a little bit before my time, but like you're right, to go out and find out much more detailed of who's using it, more importantly, who's not using it and why they're not using it.
Exactly.
Is one of the
What
things.
can we change that makes it something that is relevant to them?
Yeah. So fortunately, there's a lot of smart people in the department, smart people in the industry and things that we can look at. One of the big things that we've been doing right now is making sure that, we're getting back to kind of pre-pandemic levels and, with moving the bond forward operations. One of the big things we've kind of hinted at with you all is the updating the system plan. So the system plan is the council adopted plan that was adopted in 2016 that provides the overall kind of scope and scale of the department's work. We're due for an update on that. It was also called out in the bond audit. And so we're working on a roadmap to start doing that update. And to President Peterson's point, how can we tie in with the 2040, 27 revisioning process that'll be happening too in the planning department. So right now we're doing a level of service capture to really understand baseline what are all of the different things that we provide across the department, whether it's internal or external facing, and start using that to help build out a case too with our equity plan, our tribal affairs work, our ADA accessibility, overall capital asset to help inform the next update of this system plan. I think you're right. One of those big pieces we have to look at is what does utilization look like? How are we measuring, defining it? And like, what is the best and most efficient way to capture that? Is it more periodic surveys? We used to have a secret shoppers program where folks would come out to the parks and they'd give us a score on like cleanliness of restrooms and those kind of things. I think that program went away. So like that is an indicator. And as we do our bond outcomes work and continue these conversations with council, I think it's good for us to think of, how can we get some of that best disaggregated and really best information on utilization in a way that is effective to capture and collect it. So I appreciate that. I don't have a budget ask for you right now, but I'll definitely be considering as we scope out the system plan update, when and where we will need some additional funding for probably some contracts for some folks to help us think through how and where we can collect this data and what it looks like, not just to collect it in one time, but a better process in the future.
Great, thanks.
Colleagues,
I
anymore?
will point out
Oh,
that some of our other departments, even when they don't know exactly what they need to do, are asking for funds in anticipation of expanding something like that. So I'd be receptive to that. And I would put effort into convincing my colleagues to be receptive to it as well. Thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you, Counselor.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Thanks, Deputy President Wong. John, great presentation. I don't think I've heard you talk about large scale community visions throughout your presentation. So just would love to hear. I know we went through a recent round of expressions of interest and community workshops and things like that. Just kind of wondering how you're feeling, how your team is feeling, kind of the short term for the program, and what else the council can do to continue to activate that new idea that was created in the bond. So good things take time, not trying to rush it, but just want to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor Gonzalez. So last time we spoke with you all, you approved some changes to the program, which we appreciate, which I think will make it easier for folks to apply. And so we held two different open houses, one in person and one virtually, just earlier this month. We had some good participation and some good folks turn out. I hear we've got at least one proposal that's coming in, and we're expecting several. And so our goal is to hopefully bring some proposals to you all this fall, if not sooner, that we feel are strong for that consideration. So in terms of things that you all can do to help, I think continue to share those ideas and promote it. So hopefully we're getting those ideas coming in so that staff can work it and help people with their, potential letters of inquiry or full applications even when we get to that place. So feeling good about it. We've definitely heard that folks appreciated that we've edited and reduced some of the match requirements, that we've created space for folks to have non-contiguous projects, so it doesn't have to all be on a single campus. And we've created a rolling process to take those applications in as they come. And the other big thing that might slow things down a bit, but in the end will be more effective, is the requirement for public agencies to be the one to actually submit the proposal, so that we can guarantee we've got that public entity that can capitalize the bond as quickly as possible. So seems to be on track, and we're excited to bring more updates to you as it progresses.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, great. I think seeing no other comments. Thank you very much, John. Okay, next up we have COO Communications. And I'll turn it over to Marisa.
Thank you, Deputy President Wong. I had the honor of speaking to a group of about 60 folks from around the country who book sporting and competition events at Sports ETA, a little symposium that's happening right now, hosted at OCC and also at the Hyatt. It was an honor to just present the idea of Expo Futures and what we're trying to do in that space. I was joined by our co-chair, one of our co-chairs from the Historical Significance Committee, Lynn Buchigami Parks, and also Paul Slyman. And it was great to share. And was once again reminded of the power of what we're trying to do, and really holding both the community and the financial sustainability pieces together. And it was also really cool to hear, and some of the questions from other folks across the country who are trying to set up similar venues or expand existing venues, particularly one from a parks department believe it was in Georgia, where they also have a senior center, and so they're looking at like a multi-generational event space that just sounded really, really cool. So very inspiring to hear what's going on across the country, and we're just going to keep feeding that inspiration into our process as we get more information back from Hunden. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any questions? No. And then we have a special announcement from our Metro attorney, Carrie McLaren.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Huang and members of the council. It's my pleasure, albeit with a little bit of a froggy voice, that might represent some emotion around a departing staff member, but to have this opportunity to really recognize Karen Starren, who is a senior program analyst and paralegal in the Office of Metro Attorney. She is our all-round property transaction expert, and she's retiring this Friday after 28 years of service at Metro. It is a length of time. She's accomplished much, and if I can just go through a few of that, I think it bears repeating and acknowledging. Karen started on February 14th in 1996, the same day that the 1995 Parks and Open Space Bond closed on its 14th transaction. And it's actually before the Transit-Oriented Development Program came to Metro. So Karen really was here in the beginning of many things. It's a little daunting to have her sitting on my back shoulder, but it's somewhat representative of the fact that Karen has really stood in support of so many of our programs. So I'll just accept that, and you can look at her facial reaction behind me. Over Karen's career, Parks and Nature closed on an additional 497 transactions over 3 bonds. Karen was the lead paralegal on almost 250 of those acquisitions, protecting more than 7,000 acres of land and miles of trails. All told, Metro has protected more than 18,000 acres of land during Karen's tenure. So if you visit a natural area, you walk on a regional trail, chances are Karen had a hand in it. She was a key member of our team. For that, we're grateful. Karen is also an essential member of the team handling transit-oriented development and affordable housing transactions, completing pre-closing due diligence and closing scores of deals. Thousands of transit-oriented and affordable housing residential units were added to centers and corridors in the Metro region. And as a result, much as Karen's hand has played a role in our natural areas, Karen's hand has played a role in our urban areas. The look, the feel, and livability and accessibility to housing for the region was vastly improved as a result of her work. Karen is known throughout the agency as a specialist on title, easements, deed records. Staff regularly reach out for help researching all types of property questions, whether it's WPEZ, the zoo, Expo. She is often the one to find the answer, the document, or the path forward. Metro is fortunate to have had her steady hand and keen eye for detail. It goes without saying that Karen's dedication and passion for her work is inspiring. Please join me in thanking Karen for her years of service at Metro and to the region. The impact of her work will be felt for generations to come. And I'd like to ask Karen to stand so we could give her a round of applause. Thank you, Councilor.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Karen, for all your years of work. It's quite a legacy. Any additional kudos?
A lot of knowledge gone. Lots of institutional knowledge.
Yes.
I've been doing my best to pass it on to those who follow behind me.
Absolutely. Continuity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very. Thank you so much. Okay. Lastly, we have Councilor Communications. Councilors, any updates? Oh, President Peterson.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the expo and just kind of make a declarative statement in support of Metro and our staff. There are a lot of forces, as we have talked about, within the region and others who had hoped that maybe Expo would go a different direction, who are still questioning our ability to carry this out. And I just want to say that we must do this. We need to do this for our region. We need to do this for the people of our region, our economic engine of travel, tourism, folks traveling here. It needs a kickstart. And this has been one of the most important things that I could not have foreseen that we would take on, besides the homeless, supportive homelessness measure, to be able to be part of restoring our region back to pride. We need to all take pride in the fact that we are having this conversation, that we have staff that are committed, that we have volunteers that are committed, and communities that will benefit from this like they've never benefited before. So I just want to, it's a declarative statement. I have heard things in the background, rumors in the background. Metro has looked at other things, has never been able to pull off anything at Expo, and we have never been so close. Other things were ideas, but we're actually into the implementation phase of how to do it. And I think that's extremely important to note. And I just want to thank my colleagues. I want to thank Marisa for her work with the entire community to basically rally around something that is doable, practical, and yet so important to this region. And I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to the council. Thank you to staff. And just, if we're going to have, just one of those declarative end of meetings, beautiful moments, I just want to say that my heart is on that one today. And I really appreciate all that everybody has done to get us to this point, because we are going to make some major changes for this region that will benefit, again, generations to come. So thank you.
Great. Well said, Madam President. Okay, seeing no further discussion, the council work session is adjourned, and our next regular meeting is scheduled for Thursday, April 25th, 2024 at 10:30 a.m.
Great.